Hi, and welcome to Q's Workshop. Today we're back on the CNC machine. Let's go take a look.
Right, now that the machine is built, let's get into the software side of things. So, just the first thing to note, when connecting your computer, the offline controllers will not be available. They literally come up on the screens. It will come up and say that the USB is connected. Alright, so you won't be able to do anything with it. You probably see I've got a touchscreen one connected here and the original one. I cover off the touchscreen a little bit later in the video. So just a note, I've gone through all this configuration already just to familiarize myself with it. I've created various little clips of me doing it, but it was just cumbersome trying to tie all of those things together. So I thought, let me do another video where I can run through it all in one go, and then where needed I will just embed little pieces of video clip as I move along. So let's head over to the computer and take a look at the software side of things. Alright, so the very first thing is, let's take a look at the flash stick that's provided. So on the flash stick they provide a soft copy of the user manual, useful if you want to archive it, but you do have the hard copy. They provide software, so they do give you a Gerbil control software called Candle. So I'm not going to be covering Candle in here. I'm going to be looking at Universal G-Code Sender. I don't know if Candle is available for Mac or not. I just know that Universal G-Code Sender is, and that's why I downloaded that, because I've seen it in a lot of the videos that I watched while I was doing research before I purchased the machine. So that's why I went with Universal G-Code Sender. They provide the drivers for Windows. And they also provide the drivers and a little installation manual for Mac, so that's all available for you. They give you some instructions on updating firmware. I'm not going to go into that. And then they give you some test engravings that you can do. So, as I said, I've gone through various videos already. I've already done my first cuts. So this is the Dragon test cut that they actually give. I must add that the resolution of this is outstanding. I'm not surprised because of the very fine-tipped V-bits that they give with, but this is really good, and it looks really good. So that's the one that I did. So that's just a picture engraving, and then this is more just lettering, carving out lettering more than anything else. So those are three separate ones that I did. The fourth test one that they give is a PC board engraving, so obviously I don't need that, or I wasn't going to go through that. Right, so that's the flash stick and everything that they provide you. If we look at Universal G-Code Sender, so I've already installed this, as I mentioned, I've gone through a lot of this stuff already. But the very first thing that you want to do here, and I'm sure the same thing is going to be relevant when looking at the likes of Candle as an application or other control softwares, is they're going to provide you a wizard of some sort, because there's certain things that you're going to have to do to calibrate and configure your machine for the software and for it to run optimally. All right, so let's open the wizard and then we can run through what those are. So very first, the machine is going to want to make a connection, or the software is going to want to make a connection to the machine, and that's where those drivers come into play. So I've already installed the Mac drivers that's provided on the flash stick, and then I run through what it's looking for. So yes, it's a serial connection, and that's the most common one that's used, so it's a serial connection. Port-wise, if you need to know what port your machine is plugged into or what it was detected on for your computer, in the likes of Windows, you can go into Device Manager and you can go under your ports and you would be able to see which one actually detected the machine. On your Mac, you would go into your system information there is a device report or system report. Within there, you can actually see which port is being used to connect to the machine. But again, a lot of that is for older versions of software or some more, let's say, raw versions of software. Later models does automatically detect these things and provide those things in the software. So here you can actually see it's obviously not Bluetooth. I'm not connecting to it in Bluetooth, so it must be one of these serial ports here. The bottom one is saying that it's USB dial-in. This is obviously not dialing. I'm not dialing in with it. There's no modem involved, so it's probably just this direct serial connection, USB serial one. So I select that one. It is Gerbil software, and we're using the baud rate. We leave that as it's detected, but the baud rate is meant to be 115200. We click connect. So this now establishes a connection to the machine. The very first thing that you're going to notice is that it goes into an alarm state. Okay, now the alarm state, and how I understand it, is because the software doesn't know the location of the spindle and the table on your machine, it automatically puts it into alarm state. So this is to ensure that you acknowledge that the machine isn't aware of what's happening, or sorry, the software doesn't know what's happening on the machine because it hasn't detected where the spindle is, it hasn't detected where the table is. Okay, so that's why it goes into alarm state. So you have to clear that alarm state before you can do anything. But that's completely separate. The first thing that we're going to continue doing is we're going to run through the wizard. So the first thing was it created the connection. Great. There's a settings import. So if you've run through this previously and you've saved some settings, you can import it here. Obviously, let's say being the first time, I wouldn't have those settings, and this is the second time I'm running through it, but I never saved any settings, so I wouldn't do that. So we skip that. Motor wiring. So what this allows you to do is this allows you to change the direction that the motors would use, or the spindles would use, to change the direct or to move the table in certain directions. Okay, so on here, for instance, it by default picked up that the y-axis needs to be reverse direction. Okay, so I left it as default. I didn't put that tick there, I didn't take it away, I left it like that because I wasn't sure what the machine considered a reverse direction. I can just imagine that's probably if you have the stepper motor on the front of the machine instead of the back of the machine. For the x-axis, for instance, it could be if you've got the stepper motor on the left-hand side of the machine instead of on the right-hand side of the machine, which would then mean that the motor has to turn in a different direction to travel the spindle or the table in the same direction. Okay, so that's all that I can imagine this being, but it does allow you to move the table in the X and Y direction. So if you click X, it moves in the plus and minus, and then you can actually tick the reverse button to reverse that. So if I click minus, instead of it moving left, if I tick the reverse button, if I click minus, it would move right instead. But as you can see here, I've already run through the software, and because I've got my soft limits enabled, it's not going to allow me to actually set anything here. And I'll get into some, let's say, issues or things that you need to understand about soft limits, and this is kind of one of them. Another very important step that you need to do is step calibration, and the step calibration is fine-tuning the stepper motor movement to a distance. So stepper motors work on steps. So within the motor, it's got a very fine little plate in there that and light that detects circular movement as little steps. Okay, but now how that is translated into linear movement is what we're trying to calibrate here. So how I did it is two separate ways. For the X and the Y axis, I put an aluminium plate down. So I fastened the aluminium plate down onto the bed. I dropped the spindle down that I can mark it. So I put one of the fine V-bits in it. I marked the aluminium at a 0 point. I then moved over, so in the software, I moved over a certain amount of steps. I'm just going to disable soft limits and then we can go back. So I moved over a certain amount of steps. So I'm going to use 5 millimeters as an example. I dropped the spindle again and I marked the aluminium again at 5 millimeters. So I did this over a bigger distance. I used 100 millimeters, but I'm not going to cover that here. So you move 5 millimeters, I mark the bed, then I take a caliper, so a vernier caliper or dial caliper, and I measure the distance between those two lines. And more often than not, depending on how fine you can measure, you would probably notice that the movement wasn't 5 millimeters. So it's either more or less. Okay, and that number you type into the actual movement. Okay, so if I just take an example, the table moved the actual distance between those lines was 4.8. I do the same thing with the Y. I make a mark on the aluminium and I move 5 millimeters down, and I mark on the aluminium again with the V-bit. I take the caliper and I measure what is that distance. So let's say, for instance, I got 4.95 there. Now what the software does is it calculates the steps per millimeter over here. So it's calculating any adjustment that it needs to do per millimeter. So because I've now told it I moved 5 millimeters, but it actually only moved this, it knows that there is a certain amount of offset, so it has to adjust what its movement is. You type this top number of what it is in here, and you can update the software. And you can do this a couple of times after one another, because once you've updated the software that it moves differently, or it moves smaller steps or bigger steps, you would probably find that this measurement becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. So eventually you'd probably end up, when measuring, to 4.995, something like that. So it becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. So that adjustment that you're doing is calibrating to a very fine level, and that's really what you're looking for. Okay, so I've done this in two ways. The very first one was the aluminium that I used, so I calibrated with a piece of aluminium and my caliper. The second way I did it was with a dial indicator. So I mounted a dial indicator on the bed, and against the spindle I again moved 5 to 10 millimeters, and I looked at what that reading was, and I compared that reading against the one that I got when I was using the caliper, just to validate myself, to validate my own measurements, because as I said, this step is very important if you want your machine to run as true as possible with the most finest movements, and be calibrated perfectly. You need to try and spend time on this and get the step calibration correct. All right, so I'm not going to save anything here because I've already done this, and I've already calibrated it in. So these are the settings for my machine and the steppers. So that's as fine as I was able to get it. The first numbers that you get is usually only 2 decimal places. As you move along, you will get 3 decimal places, and I would say go as far as that. You don't have to do this calibration indefinitely, but try and do it a couple of times to get that very fine calibration done. Right, and once you've updated all those, next up is limit switches. So this is to enable your limit switches on the machine. So yes, the machine has got limit switches, and it allows you to test your limit switches here. So it actually says try your limit switches. So as I go now, I'm going to try them. So what I've noticed, if you just push one limit switch, it takes a little while for the software to understand that you're doing a test now. So click it a couple of times, but there you can see I'm testing the X, I'm testing the Y, and I'm testing the Z. You can invert these limit switches. Inverting means it automatically thinks that the limit switch is tripped, even though it's not tripped. It thinks that it's tripped until you press it, and then it confirms that it's now pressed. So I don't know how you would use it inverted or why you would use it inverted. I don't know if there's a difference, but I've just left it with non-inverted. So there you can test. After you've tested, go next. Next one is homing, and I found this step pretty important with this particular machine, and that was figuring out the direction of the limit switches. Okay, and what this is where is the limit switches on your machine. When I first turned it on, when I first went through the wizard, the X and the Y axis was on negative, which meant my X axis is sitting on the negative side of my spindle. So in the minus, when it moves to the left, that's where the limit switch sits, but that's not where it sits. It sits on the right hand side. So I actually had to change this, because the very first time that I tried to home the machine moved to where it thinks the limit switches are. So it automatically moved to the negative, so it moved my spindle to the right, and it moved the table, my Y-axis, to the back, which is incorrect because I don't have limit switches there. So I had to shut the machine down as quick as possible, otherwise it was going to run to the side of the machine. And when I came back, I had to make sure that I changed these to it's sitting at the positive side. So X is positive, Y is positive, and the Z is sitting at the positive side. All right, so just take a note of that one, because I definitely had to do that. And then try homing. As soon as you click on that, it just moves your spindle and moves the table to the limit switches. So it will first touch the limit switch, so it will trip your limit switch. And once it trips the limit switch, it moves back off the limit switch a little bit, and then it does a very fine step to trip it again. So it creeps up on the limit switch until it touches it, and then it kind of zeroes itself. And then the machine knows where its home is, which is its point of tripping those limit switches. That's what it considers home. All right, so you can try your home. There's the abort. So if it's homing in the wrong direction, you can abort, or you can stop the machine. You can push the emergency button, whatever you want to do to stop that. Abort is probably easier because then it doesn't switch the controller board of the machine. Okay, so moving over from the homing to soft limits. So soft limits is ultimately setting the furthest distance that you would like your table to travel away from the home point. So that's a soft figure that you can give the software. So once you home your machine, it knows this is 0 point. What you then do in soft limits is you navigate your machine the furthest direction away from your home switches that you are comfortable with. So it allows you here on different step sizes to move into the opposite direction from your limit switch. Once you reach that point that you are happy with, so let's say there I'm happy with those numbers, those aren't the correct numbers, I mean, so these you would calculate by moving your own table over from the home point. You would then put that into here, so 40 millimeters, and then you would click update. That then updates it into the software. So now I've told the software, from my home point, you are only allowed to move 40 millimeters in the X direction. So on the X, 40 millimeters away from home is the maximum you're allowed to move. If I, the user of the software, try to move to 41, you restrict me. And so it literally, within your jogger control, it removes that X minus button. It will gray that out, so it doesn't allow me to move in that direction. Okay, so that just helps that you don't run the machine further than what it can, because obviously if you take the machine with, it's got linear rails and it's got the spindles and things like that, you don't want to run the machine further than what it can go, because you're probably going to damage your stepper motors and things like that. It's not like a belt. If it was belt driven, the belt usually clicks over, or the belt could snap or move Here, it's not going to do that. It's going to potentially hurt something. Okay, so it's good to have these soft limits set in the beginning. One thing that I did notice when having the soft limits set, I struggled a bit with those test engravings. So particularly to get the dragon to actually start engraving, I struggled with that with the soft limits set. I don't know if it was just the way that I was zeroing and homing and zeroing the machine, that I was kind of pushing it to a point, and then when it wanted to start the operation, it was exceeding what I set in the soft limit, so it didn't want to. As soon as I clicked engrave or start, it would go into an alert state. So I removed the soft limit and I got it to run. I just kept an eye on the first couple of movements to make sure it wasn't going to run further than what it was supposed to. But yeah, that's just something to note with the soft limits. It does take some getting used to, and you're going to have to fine-tune this correctly. So that's it for the software. Most important, spend time on the calibration. Make sure you've got that calibration done correctly, because that's ultimately what manages the movement, the fine-tuning of the movement of the machine. The homing, make sure that you set where your limit switches are, left or right hand side of the spindle, front or back of the y-axis, so those plus and negatives, make sure that that's correct. And then the soft limits, play around with that a bit to make sure that you've got that set up correctly. But ultimately that's it for the software. Right, so I've got the touchscreen offline controller connected. We'll give that a look and see how it differs from the original controller. So just a quick recap on the original controller. All that you can really do with this is browse the SD card on it to initiate a routing procedure. So you browse through the file, select a file, and then you actually push it through to the controller, and it starts routing or engraving the piece of material. That's the one. And the second is to navigate with the spindle. So you navigate the bed and the movement of the spindle. There is some, let's say, updated or hacked firmware that you can install on the controller. It requires you to solder a USB port or cable to the board, and then you can upload the firmware. The USB cable that comes on the controller itself is only to access the SD card. You can't do anything else with it. So once you plug it into your computer, you can access the SD card, and that's it. If you want to control the machine through your computer, you have to plug it into the controller board. You can't plug it into this controller. So I think that's why this controller on some of these machines that you get is optional. You don't necessarily have to take it with the machine. But I then opted to take the touch screen offline controller because it's advertised to have a bit more functionality, and that's what we're going to look at now. So I hope this is going to come through correctly on the camera. Right, so on the screen it tells you the whereabouts of the spindle. When it starts up, it actually checks for wireless connection. So on the flash stick, on the SD card that's in here, there's a wireless config file. So if we just go in there, we go to the flash or the SD card over there. So this is all the files on the SD card, some folders. If we go down, there's a Wi-Fi config file. In that Wi-Fi config file, you put the set of your network, username, password, all in plain text. So I'm not going to do that. You update it in that file, and then when you power it on, it will try and make a connection to your network. Again, that connection, very much like the ordinary offline controller, it's only to navigate the SD card. You can't control your machine through that connection. All right. So that's, if we go back, so that's to access files on the SD card. This Gerbil one is just to tell you if you connected via Wi-Fi or not. And then the config goes to the config screen. So that's the same as going on the very first home screen. If you click on the little gear there, it takes you to the config. There's an unlock button. So if your machine is locked, so it's hit one of the limit switches, you need to unlock it so you can unlock it. It's got a home, so that will then home the machine. The WCS, that is to zero your coordinates. So at the moment it's standing somewhere specific. I can click that or push that then, and then it zeroes all of my axis. I'll go back. Reset is to reset the machine, so kind of just like powers on or powers off and powers on the controller board. Tools, you can actually set different tool positions here. I haven't tried that yet, but what it would do is you can set a tool position, probably your heights of your tools, if you're putting them in exactly the same. If you've got little collets specific to your tools, you could set the heights, and then you can actually go to those different tooling positions so that you don't have to zero your spindle every time depending on the tool that you're inserting. RPM, so that's just to set the spindle, so you can actually then set the spindle speeds through that. This one here, which is just fingers pointing to little dots, doesn't actually have anything in. It's just blank screen, so I'm not quite sure what that is for. There's nothing in the little manual for it. And then this top one is literally just to control the movement. Okay, that's very fine control, but let's move it there. So this is just then to move the spindles, and that's it. So two of the options is very much like the ordinary controller, which is moving the spindles and the access to the TFT. Additional, I would say, is probably just being able to home the machine, being able to zero your axis. So once you found your workpiece, you can zero it, and then the software knows where it is. And the tools. That's probably the only thing that you can do additional to on the touchscreen versus the ordinary. My opinion on the offline controllers, being a novice, I would probably say in the beginning I'll have this connected to a computer and control it via a computer, just because it's got a little bit more functionality and you can see what it's doing. Once I've become a little bit more experienced with designing and creating the G-code files, then I'll probably start using these controllers a bit more, because then I can use it in an offline mode. I bring my file on the SD card, I pop it in and I click it, and it goes and it does what I want it to do. Where right now I'm not so confident in my skills with creating the G-codes through the CAM software, so I would probably still have it connected to a computer in the beginning, just until I get the feeling of what I'm doing. But yeah, that's it just for this controller. Alright, so in closing, my opinion of the machine, I could definitely recommend this machine. I spent my personal money on this, so it's not sponsored or anything like that, but I can definitely recommend this. If I just look at the quality, so the sturdiness, the solid base, which was a concern of mine at the price, was how rigid the machine was going to be. So it is rigid, it's solid, everything is made from aluminium on the machine, with the back linear rails. It's the gantry is very sturdy on the machine. If I look at what they've done with the machine, so if we look at some of those older videos from 3 years ago, there was comments about mounting the power supply as an example. So they've definitely taken feedback like that. So you do get, the power supply's got slots to actually mount it. It comes with little brackets, it's got screw holes, everything like that, so that can get mounted out the way. If we just look at the cable management within here for the Y-axis limit switch, they've given one of these little extrusion covers that you can hold the wire in there. So they've definitely taken feedback from all of those reviews previously given, and they've put that into work. So that's a definite plus on the machine. Things that I would probably do with the machine is put some covers for the rails here in front and the lead screw front and back here, because it does make quite a mess when you're carving out small pieces like the wood. It made a lot of mess, especially onto these rails, which you have to clean afterwards because it gets stuck on the oil and on the grease that's on those rails. So it takes a little bit of cleaning afterwards. So I might just get some sort of cover that can move with the bed here in the front and at the back to keep the immediate dust off those rails. Things that I would probably give a lower rating are the mounting, the workpiece mounting fixtures. So it's not that this fixture itself, it doesn't work, because it does work. I think it's just a little bit limited with the holding holes on the base. So for instance, on the side, if you want to mount something on the side here, it's limited to how you can screw this in on the corner. So this hole probably would be better serving if it was a little bit closer to the middle, that you've got some flexibility on moving this, rather than it being right here on the edge, which you struggle with. And then if you do move it in, you struggle to turn this little finger nut on it. So it's not that they don't work. The placement and the amount of holes could be increased a bit, because you are now limited by the size of your working piece because of how far these holes are from one another. So you can't have a small working piece because these holes are too close to one another. So you have to go to the next hole, which then means your work pieces might be bigger than what you want it to be, especially if you're working with little scraps and things. But if you're carving larger items, it doesn't really matter. So I'll probably look at a little vise that can mount in the middle, that gives a little bit more flexibility with size of mounting. But I mean, that's really being going into the nitty-gritty of the machine. But just as overall quality and what you get, it's definitely a bonus. So if we now take a step back into outside of this machine, so if we go into the software side of things, it's definitely a learning curve. So I mean, if you're a novice like me and you want to get into CNC, you probably don't mind that learning curve. It's something that you want to do. You want to learn new things, so it's good. But it's definitely something to consider. You're going to have to understand how the softwares work and what they are. I can't give advice on that. I'm still new at it. I'm only getting into it. But there's ultimately three elements that you would require. The very first is some sort of CAD software. So unless you're just downloading pictures because you want to engrave some things, if you want to get a little bit deeper into at least the CNC milling side of things, you would need some sort of CAD software to create your drawings. Then moving on, most CAD softwares have CAM in as well. You would need a CAM software to take your drawing and change that into a language that the machine understands, which is machine tool path structures. So it takes your drawing and it makes it into what the end mill needs to do. It would need to do, where it needs to go. So spindle speeds and motion of the spindle. That's essentially what the CAM software does and does. At a very base level, it's what the CAM software does. Then when you look at the application Candle and Universal G-Code Sender, which I'm using, that's purely to take that CAM export then and send it to the machine. So it then instructs the machine to do something with that CAM software. So those are the three elements that you're going to need on the software side. But I think that's it. I'm going to close the video here. I'm going to drop the links of the machine and the touch offline controller into the description. As I mentioned, this is not sponsored, but I think credit is definitely due to the seller of the machine. So I'll drop those into the description. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. It helps get a little bit more exposure on my videos. And if you haven't yet, consider subscribing. But that's it. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.